All right. Thanks very much, everyone. As you can see, we've got 5 panelists and just 1 hour. So we're going to try to cram a lot in, which means that I'll have to be a strict timekeeper. So we're going to hold all audience questions till the end, but we will reserve 20 minutes for that. For our panelists, I think you've all gotten the rundown, but we're going to do some introductory questions for each one of our panelists in lieu of me introducing everybody. And you'll have 3 minutes for those, and Eric will keep the time and give you a nice 30-second warning. And you can finish your thought at that point. And once you've all gone through, we'll ask some questions and try to generate some discussion and move right on into the Q&A for our last 20 minutes. So thank all of you for being here, thank all of you for being here, and let's get right into it. I want to start with Commander Ralph Ennis of MPD. Could you just tell the audience a little bit of foundational information about body cameras? What do they record in terms of the perspective, audio, and visual, and when are they turned on and off?
Okay. Let me just start by saying any police department that engages in a body camera program has a lot of work to do prior to deploying cameras. It's not as simple as just putting cameras out. It was about a 3-year process for us. So start there. But I will, so the way the cameras work, and this is one right here, all of our officers have this, it's a Taser Body 2 camera. The way they work is that they walk around during the day when they're on duty and the camera's on the on mode like this. You can tell it's on, it'll blink green. When it's on, it's not recording per se. So they're walking around and it's in a constant buffering mode. What that means is that there's always 30 seconds of video available on the camera at all times. So the minute an officer turns the camera on, it goes back and pulls that previous 30 seconds into the video and then also records from the time they turn it on. The previous 30 seconds is not, there's no audio recording. So if you're ever in a position to where you're looking at a body camera video, you'll know that there's nothing wrong if there's no sound the first 30 seconds. It's supposed to be that way. Now, officers carry the camera. It's on position all the time. This is the rules. This is the simple rules, is that if they're engaged in police activity, they should have the camera on. If they're on a call for service, they're going to have it on. If they're pulling you over on a traffic stop, they're going to have it on. If they're walking up to somebody they suspect of committing a crime and talking to them, they're going to have it on. They do not need to have it on for non-police activity. So if they're out community policing in the neighborhood playing basketball with a bunch of kids or doing anything else, visiting a rec center, whatever else they're doing, it does not need to be recording at that time because there's no police nexus. No police investigative nexus associated with it. Now, once they make a recording, they turn the camera off, and when they turn the camera off, at that point, they go to their cell phone, which we've issued. Every officer has a body camera, a cell phone, and there's an app on their cell phone. They go to that app, they pull the video they just made up, and they note the video. Now, there's a couple things to know here. This is the most important part about a police department making a video, is making sure this step here is done correctly. What they do when they note the video is in the ID field, they put the case number. So if you had called the police for a burglary or whatever you had called them for and you get a police report, they use the numbers that they had given to you at the end of that experience with the officer, and they use that as the ID. It's a unique identifier so we can find that particular video when we go search for it. The second thing they do is they type in the address, the date and time, and the type of call they were on. The third thing they do is they set the category, and this by far is the single most important thing they do. The category is how long we're going to retain the video and what type of video it is. So if they'd have responded for a burglary, we'll stay with that example, the category would be all other felonies. It's preset that when you pick all other felonies, it automatically keeps the video for 6 years. 6 years is the statute of limitations. You'll note around the country that police departments, as you get away from DC or in other areas, it's very arbitrary in how long they keep video for whatever they're keeping it for. MPD chose early on that our base retention is going to be 90 days. 90 days is outlined in 28 CFR, which is federal guidance, which says that you shall not keep intelligence information on people for longer than 90 days without having a criminal nexus. That's also guideline from the federal government. I think it's OMB gives the same guidance also. So we chose not to keep video that's not related to anything else longer than 90 days. If it's related to a crime, it'll be kept as long as the statute of limitations is. And if it's related to an administrative investigation, it's kept as long as our retention schedule, the district government retention schedule, dictates. At that point, it's automatically deleted. As you can see why this is the most important step, because if an officer is one or an only witness in a case, we have to have that video, because if we've made video and lose it, then we have to answer for that in court. Okay? So that's the most important things about body camera video. I literally could talk to you for 3 hours about it. So at a high level, just know that that's what we focus on right there.
Thanks.
And we brought an example video from Ms. Jones.
Okay.
So this is an example. Are you going to show it now? This is an example of a video. What this is a video we released publicly. These are officers over in the 7th District of Martin Luther King and Good Hope Road area. They had got a call for service for a, it's going awful slow, isn't it? Yeah, that's all right. So I'll give you some, while we're doing this, you notice the video is cockeyed. This is something else that we go try hard to train our officers, is how to hold to hold it on their chest, or how to mount it on their chest. This particular officer, for whatever reason, must have had it turned that way, so thus the video is cockeyed in the picture. Okay, so is it working? No, I don't know what's going on. It worked in VLC, but maybe try it again later.
Yeah.
But what this would have showed you is, it would have showed you no audio for 30 seconds, and then there would have been 2 officers that drove by an alley. They stopped their car past the alley, they come back, and they notice that there's a gentleman robbing somebody at knife point. So they go right up at knife point, they draw down on the guy, he drops the knife, and they arrest him. So this was actually released. If you go on, if you Google Metropolitan Police Department body camera, knife, I think armed robbery, this will pop up and you can watch it. Okay?
Great.
All right.
All right. We've also got Robert Becker from the DC Open Government Coalition. Your organization was very much involved in the, I guess, very contentious, for those of us following DC politics, fight against the mayor's proposal to FOIA exempt body camera footage. Could you talk about what were the arguments the mayor put forward, and what were your arguments against that?
Yeah, when in 2000, I guess the body camera pilot program started in 2014 approximately.
Yes, sir.
2015 in the Budget Support Act, which accompanies the budget each year in April, there was an exemption that said body camera video is not subject to FOIA. That was what was proposed. And we heard about that. A number of other organizations, including PDS and the Police Complaint Board and the Police Union and the ACLU, testified against that exemption. The argument that was made by the mayor's office largely was that cops were interacting with people at the worst times of their lives, and there was a privacy concern in all cases, regardless of where that happened, whether it happened on the street, where it might be seen by anybody, and in fact videotaped with a cell phone, or whether it happened in somebody's house. And they said this video should not be disclosed. The second argument they made was redacting video for disclosure would be very expensive, and they anticipated, they said, between 3,000 and 4,000 requests a year for video. They estimated the cost would be about $600 an hour to redact the video. And so there were these two concerns. One was the privacy concern that they voiced, and the other was the cost of doing it. What happened along the way was, at about the same time, the mayor of Baltimore commissioned a panel that did some research and came up with the fact that the average interaction between a police officer and a person on the street was less than 15 minutes long, and their estimate of cost was less than $100 to redact that video to make it disclosable. Now, in reality, since the program went into effect, since FOI disclosures started happening, which was sometime in the past year, in fact, before all officers had cameras, there have been somewhere between 60 and 80 requests total for FOIA, under FOIA to see the videos. Our arguments were several, and I guess PDS had other concerns. One is the police interact on the street. It's a public place in most cases. And the people they interact with are in public view, and what they do is of great public interest and concern. That if there are privacy concerns, we acknowledge that there are privacy concerns. But you can deal with those privacy concerns under two different exemptions in the FOI Act. One is the general privacy exemption, which says that you can withhold something if it would be a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy if it were disclosed. There is, within the law enforcement exemption, a similar exemption that says, only it doesn't, currently does not have the word clearly in it. It only says an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. And we said to the council, this issue of privacy can be dealt with under existing exemptions. There is no reason to create a special category or a special exemption to deal with body camera video. It is different technology, but it's not really different than a dash cam. It's not really different than a CCTV cam that sees what's going on the street. So there shouldn't be a distinction in terms of FOIA.
Okay, thanks. I think we're going to have to get
Okay.
to the, but I think that's a good point to break on.
And we do have another video, foundational video for Mr. Becker to attest.
Let's see if we can see that one. This is on YouTube, so it probably. This was a traffic stop for a DUI.
That's it.
And in fact, the officer in this car is getting out to administer a field sobriety test. So this is the 30 seconds, I guess.
How you doing, sir? I can't pronounce your last name. I'm sorry. What's it? I'm here to do some testing. Are you ready? You're going to decline the testing? Okay. No problem. Sure.
I'm waiting for the BMW to come pick up my car. I was pulled over. I wasn't pulled over. I parked my car. I know my tire went out. I hit something.
Sure. Okay. So how about when we get back to the station, would you be interested in...
Do what you have to do. You want to do the station service.
Ask if you're going to do your run.
I'm sitting in my car. I'm parked.
One of the reasons I showed that video is everything that's identifiable has been blocked out. The computer screen in the cruiser, the piece of paper that was in the first officer's hand, the face of the person who was stopped, and when the officer who was going to do the test asked the man's name, that was bleeped out. I believe, and I think in terms of the FOI Act, MPD is very over broadly reading the privacy exemption. But we can have that discussion later on.
Okay, great. We've also got with us Rochelle Howard from the DC Office of Police Complaints. If you could just briefly describe what it is that the OPC does and what the body camera program, how that's changed, the nature, quantity, and frequency of the complaints.
So I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of Police Complaints. We are an independent DC government agency that has statutory authority to be the civilian oversight of MPD and DC Housing Authority Police Department. So we receive complaints from community members, and then we have independent administrative authority to investigate those complaints. And in our investigations, we have 13 administrative investigators that have no connection to the Metropolitan Police Department. We are separately independent from them, so our investigators have no connection nor prior work with the Metropolitan Police Department. So in our investigations, we have access and we gain access to all kinds of government agency documents, including the body-worn camera footage. We worked out an agreement with MPD when the body-worn camera were in the pilot. We actually did a recommendation when MPD was considering bringing the body-worn cameras to DC in 2014, asking them to communicate and coordinate with the citizens of the city and a couple other recommendations. We made 7 recommendations for implementation of the body-worn camera footage, and all 7 of those implementations MPD used and took into consideration to make sure that the community and the Community Advisory Council was involved in the implementation of the body-worn camera footage. So through that initial work, we now have an agreement where we actually have direct access to the software that contains and where the body-worn camera footage is downloaded. And so we access that in our investigations. We're not the custodian of it. We can't release it to the public. MPD is the custodian of that, and they respond to all the FOIA and citizen requests to view it, but we do use it as an investigative technique. And so MPD has fully deployed the body-worn camera footage since December 15th. All of the street and patrol officers and sergeants have the body-worn camera footage, and we are currently analyzing the statistics that we see from the body-worn camera footage in our investigations. So the initial kind of analysis that I can tell you is that it is expediting our cases. When it's a he said, she said, if a community member comes in and complains about an interaction with the Metropolitan Police Department, if there's body-worn camera footage, we can immediately look at that body-worn camera footage and decide what happened. Other times we have to get the Office of Unified Communication, dispatch records. Those take a while to get because they have to be transcribed by the staff over there. And so it actually helps us expedite the investigations, which is a service to the community members so that they don't have to wait for us to gain the documents and do all of these investigative techniques to figure out exactly what happened. It also helps us identify officers. If they know of the time and incident and of when it happened, we can look into the shift records of the software that has the body-worn camera footage and more quickly decide and determine who was involved in that incident and decide what happened in that incident. If we do believe that there's misconduct in an investigation, that report and that recommendation goes to an independent complaint examiner who then can hold a hearing to look at the evidence and make a decision on our recommendation of misconduct. So since the body-worn cameras have been out toward the end of last year, fully deployed, there have been 3 complaint examination hearings. All 3 of those had body-worn camera footage, and therefore the complaint examiners did not have to hold a hearing because they were able to look at the footage as the evidence and decide on the matters that were in the incident. So generally that's kind of how the body-worn camera footage has been helping us. We're doing statistics now. We plan on reporting it in April, which is our mid-year report for our office, about how many of our complaints do have body-worn camera footage, how many don't, and how they correspond to the allegations that we've gotten. And so we'll be able to report that at the end of March in our report that we'll put out in April. So generally that's what we do, and that's how the body-worn camera footage helps the investigation.
Thanks. We're also joined by Emily Voshell from the Special Litigation Division of the Public Defender Service for DC. Emily, I was wondering if you could tell us all about the role that body camera footage plays in criminal trials.
Sure. So I think that something that a lot of us know from watching videos of interactions between citizens and police that have surfaced since people have started carrying around these and started taking videos with their phones is that to hear about something that happened on the street and to see it is a very different thing. So in a criminal trial, evidence might come from witnesses on the stand, photographs, maybe some audio, but having body-worn camera footage is really helping juries to see and hear things that they had not before. So from the witness stand, a police officer's account of what happened or any other witness's account of what happened sounds very calm, perhaps, right? They've, finished the case, written the report, they're here, the person is being prosecuted, they've thought about what they're going to say, oftentimes they've gone over their testimony with the prosecutors, and they appear often very polished, very professional. And the body-worn camera footage allows jurors to see the interaction that the police officer is describing up on the stand, which at times can not quite match this sort of, polished, very open and closed picture that can be presented from the witness stand alone. And so, from the, I work in the public defender's office. My perspective is, as a defense attorney's perspective, but I would say that, overall, that we have welcomed the introduction of body-worn camera footage, that we've seen some evidence being suppressed. We've seen people being found not guilty because of things that have been recorded on the footage. And again, we think that jurors are able to see a fuller picture of, of what actually happened in a lot of cases. For example, if an officer takes the stand and says, I was on patrol with 4 other officers, and we, came into the apartment complex as part of our patrol and got out of our cars, and seeing, hearing that described very calmly afterwards, and seeing that in action when a number of officers are getting out of a car, sometimes very quickly, and people are standing in the apartment complex of all ages, and seeing the way that officers interact with people and sometimes treat people is very different. Another thing I would very quickly add is that there's a talk about all officers having body-worn cameras. There are units within MPD that don't. So as much as the jury will get to see in some cases, the officers that do, and I believe those units are vice units and non-uniformed units who have a very high level of citizen interaction. So, so juries are not getting to know how those officers interact with the police. And then one quick other point, and I think that this was alluded to earlier, in terms of a privacy matter, though there is value to these videos in criminal trials, we do still care about the privacy rights of our clients and the need not to have their footage of their interactions with the police put up on the internet and there forever for anyone to see.
Thanks. And finally, we have Ms. Beverley Smith, who's done work with a lot of community groups organizing around both community violence and police brutality issues. Her son, Alonzo Smith, was lost tragically in a very high-profile case involving some private security guards. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, first, your experience as someone directly and personally affected by police-citizen interactions, or in this case, armed security guard interaction. And then, if there's time, to talk a little bit about some of the organizing work that you and other similarly situated mothers have been doing.
Sure. As you mentioned, my son Alonzo Smith was murdered by 2 special police officers on November the 1st, 2015. The U.S. Attorney General Office intentionally kept the decision on a non-indictment on my son's case until 2 weeks prior to his first-year anniversary of being murdered. My personal experience with the body cam, it has its pros and cons. As far as misconduct by police officers, when it is recorded, sometimes it goes in the favor of the citizen. And I personally know a woman who her son actually was unjustifiably arrested, and the case just went to court this past January, and the grand jury heard the case, and in 40 minutes the judge dismissed the case. And he was facing with assault on a police officer and resistant arrest. My personal experience is when the mayor released my son's video, let me back up. The Metropolitan Police Department, as you earlier heard, was under a pilot program in 2014. My son's case was the first case that the mayor decided to release to the public. And her reasoning for releasing this video is because it is of great public interest. Well, all police shooting of a citizen is in great public interest. While my son's case, particularly, as she stated, was in great public interest, is because it would shed a good light on MPD. Because the two special police officers, you can see in the video, had their total body weight in my son's back, which that was one of the causes of his death, compression of the torso. You see MPD come in and try to resuscitate my son, but poorly attempt to resuscitate my son. I'm sorry, I get flashbacks on the video, but the way that they attempt to resuscitate my son was done incorrectly. Also, when two investigators of MPD's 7th District brought the videotape to my home so that I can view it, first they lied to me. They said that they would not release it to the public until I view it. Well, I discovered after they allowed me to review it, they had already released it to the public 40 minutes earlier. The tape was redacted, okay? Meaning that the face of everyone in the video was blacked out. My 30 minutes was 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, I think we all are interested in knowing sort of how, you have turned that experience into
Yes.
an activist
Yes.
program. So if
I
you
can
could
continue
talk
on.
a little bit more about
Okay,
that.
yes. Well, after the murder of my son, I was not involved in being an activist. But because the tragic death of my son and the unfairly non-indictment of my son's case, I felt compelled to become an activist. I am also a retired federal worker. So this is what I do now on a full-time basis, not only to fight for justice for my son, but for also every victim of police brutality. I am fighting for justice for them as well. I am involved with several organizations. One of the organizations I am involved with is called Coalition of Concerned Mothers, and I'll read a brief statement on our mission statement. Our mission is to create collaborative partnerships with families who have been affected by senseless killings, police brutality, and mass incarceration, while identifying and supporting legislative and community-initiated change. We are a group of mothers who have lost their children to police brutality and inter-community violence. We always say that we have joined a club that no one else wants to join. We travel throughout the country to assist other moms whose children have been unjustifiably murdered by police officers. Also, we are currently in the stage of trying to not also provide resources and emotional support, but financial support to these moms. Because unless you have unfortunately lost a child, you do not realize the emotional trauma that takes place. Even some moms has actually committed suicide from the loss of their child. They lose their job, they go into a deep depression. So as one of the organizers of Coalition of Concerned Mother, this is what we do. We step in and we assist other families, and other families who have been impacted also assist us. Another organization I'm involved with is called Every Case Matters. And Every Case Matter has an initiative to have Congress to make mandatory the Death in Custody Reporting Act from all law enforcement agency. And what a lot of people don't realize is that this has been a bill for a couple of years. And Metropolitan Police, not only Metropolitan Police, but all law enforcement agency are supposed to report all death in custody. They have not been doing it, okay? Now, when they do not report all death in custodies, okay, they're supposed to have 10% of their budget taken away from them. So what every case matter does is we do a lot of protesting at Department of Justice. A couple months ago, we had 100,000 signatures that we had turned into DOJ to get them to enforce, to make mandatory the Death in Custody Reporting Act. We are getting ready to launch an international tour, which we are attempting to receive 1 million signatures to put weight on Department of J to make this mandatory. I have also founded myself a grief healing support group, which is called Circle of Love and Support. And it's for families that have been impacted by police brutality and inter-community violence at Anacostia Library once a month.
Thank you very much. And I
You're
think
welcome.
that touches on another question that I had, that, we've heard a lot about what the body cameras do capture, but for instance, in your son's case, the special police officers were not wearing cameras. Emily mentioned that some of the units in MPD are not equipped with cameras. So I was hoping to hear from Commander Ennis as well as Rochelle, what doesn't get captured on the body camera footage, and what effect does that have on the way that citizens are able to adjudicate their claims with?
Right, so I'll start by talking about the units that have them. Right now, every forward-facing uniformed member of MPD has a camera. So if you come in regular contact with the public and you're wearing a uniform, you have a camera. Our thinking behind not giving non-uniform members cameras at this point is there'd be no purpose of them being non-uniformed if they were carrying a police camera when they're outer clothes, because everybody would know who they were. So there's a reason these units are non-uniform, and putting a big police badge on their outer clothing defeats the purpose. The second thing is that you have to keep in mind is that cameras are an electronic digital record of what had occurred on a scene. They don't take into account stress. They don't take into account tunnel vision. They don't take into account a whole lot of things that humans are subject to when they're in very high stressful situations. This particular camera is, I think it's 142-degree angle. Officers are told to wear them high, but it's still it's like a fisheye, basically a fisheye camera that it's capturing. So if I'm in a room and I think he has a gun for whatever reason, and I'm focusing on him, I'm looking at him, but the camera's looking at this. So what you're doing over here, even though it's on the video, doesn't necessarily mean I'm seeing it because I'm looking at him, right? So we have to do a good job, and our prosecutors have to do a good job of explaining that to juries and to people when these videos are being shown. And it kind of just depends on the situation.
Okay. And could you talk a little bit about, those cases where there is no video now that it's quasi-ubiquitous? What does that leave out?
Sure. So the things that our office, the 6 types of allegations that our office is statutorily authorized to investigate is force, retaliation, discrimination, failure for the officer to ID when asked. Discrimination is the last one. I always forget that one. And so we did a report back in January with 25%, which is the most common, which is the highest number that we have. 25% of our allegations of the complaints that received are for language and conduct. And so if a complainant comes in, a community member comes in that has an interaction with the Metropolitan Police Department, officer or DC Housing Authority Police Department, officer about language and conduct, something to the effect of, I thought they were rude to me, I thought they didn't take my complaint seriously, I thought they didn't treat me with respect, and there's no body-worn camera footage, it's he said versus she said. If there was a traffic stop and the officer approached the complainant and the complainant felt threatened or the complainant felt like the officer was treating them disrespectfully, and there's no body-worn camera footage, we have the complainant's word against the officer's word. And that's how the cases were handled previously to the body-worn camera footage. And so we still take the necessary investigative steps to figure out what happened in those incidents. But like I mentioned earlier, when we do have body-worn camera footage, it's kind of like the third person in the room. You know, everyone says there's three sides to every story. One side, the other side, and the actual truth. And so that's actually what the body-worn camera footage helps our investigators do, if there is. But when there's not body-worn camera footage, just like every other case before there wasn't body-worn camera footage, you know, we do the investigative steps that we can to figure out what happened and truly whether there's merit or not to the allegations of misconduct.
Can I add to that just for 30? So when we decided to go to the body cameras, especially recording is mandatory. So if the officers don't record, they're subject to disciplinary action. So, and we do that all the time. If we find out that officers have not turned their camera on, they are subject to disciplinary action. We trust our officers, therefore we always want every interaction on video. And I'll tell you this too, is that that's not the case everywhere around the country. In a lot of places, recording is not mandatory and it's at their discretion. We kind of think it defeats the purpose, because if you ask me to turn a camera off and I turn it off and then we get in a tussle, then the whole purpose of why we have them is defeated. So we give zero discretion to our officers, and when we find out that they don't use them, we do issue the appropriate discipline.
I should say all panelists are encouraged to share their thoughts if you have any in response to the ongoing discussion.
So I'll follow up to that. So what I mentioned before, in our mid-year report, we're actually analyzing our FY16 cases that had body-worn camera footage versus the ones that didn't. And we're analyzing how many the officers should have had body-worn camera footage and didn't have body-worn camera footage. So actually the compliance with the body-worn camera general order that MPD has, that Commander Ennis talked about, we're looking into the footage that we have seen in our cases and how much of it is complying with what we understand the general order to mandate. So we should have that data by April in our mid-year report.
My understanding is, though, that you have certain circumstances like interviewing domestic violence complainants where the cameras can be turned off.
No.
No?
No. So
Okay.
what it said, the cameras cannot be turned off. What it says is that domestic violence, stalking, and sexual assault are not foiable. And it also says that any footage inside a house is not foiable. Officers are still required to have their cameras on. One thing of note with sexual assaults in particular is a few years back, we took a hard look at our sexual assault response, and we decided that we did not want uniformed members getting involved in questioning people that have made an allegation that they've been sexually assaulted. So the guidance we've given them is the minute that the allegation is made, they stop questioning the person. They call a sexual assault detective to the scene.
Who doesn't have a camera.
They do not have cameras.
Right, okay.
I want to also add that I heard the officers say that when they go to court on these police-involved shooting and killing, that they explain to the jury that they're only seeing one angle or a couple angles. However, all of us in here know there has been a lot of videos that have been surfacing of police killing that you actually see what happened from the beginning to the end, and still there is no accountability. Even with the video, when you blatantly see a police officer unjustifiably murder someone. So like I said before, when there is a police killing involved shooting, the body cams do not work. And we know this from all of the non-indictments that we received from our systemic racial judiciary system.
Emily, did you want to jump in?
Not directly in response to that, but I was wondering if there's a way. I think you had said that OPC is going to look at, at when officers should have been turning on cameras but not. But is there a more systemic, like either within MPD or elsewhere, way to review overall this? I mean, it's, I imagine that's probably logistically difficult, but to review this idea of when an officer, an individual case, like say he maybe waits until he's on the scene for 2 minutes and then turns on the camera. Like how is that
It's
being
actually not that
captured?
difficult. Well, there's a couple different nuances there. When they don't turn it on, it's not that difficult because
Right.
I can get really technical, but the cameras are actually assigned by a unique number. So every officer, mine's 4124. It's not my badge number. It's called a CAD number. It's a number that stays with me my entire career, right? So our cameras are issued by that. Well, when we receive calls for service, it's also issued to that officer under his CAD number. So we can like do, what do you call them? They're charts that we can pivot tables. And we can put information in and see, is there video when they should have had a call for service? So we can tell, and we do tell every week. We check. We're very diligent about checking up on officers and making sure they're doing, staying within the policy. It is hard sometimes because there's so much video. There's 275 terabytes of video right now, just since the beginning of the year. And I think we're at 1.1 million videos we've made since we started the program. So you can imagine you can't check every one. But the times when there's complaints or the times when they're used in court, when they're most important, people are looking at them, and if there's not a video, we find out. We've had numerous officers that have gotten in trouble for not turning them on. Most of the time, it's just because it's a mistake because of excitement or whatever else is going on. There are, when it's not, or then we take even further action if it's a more deliberate reason they don't have them on. And I'll say this too. Calls for service now, when officers are given dispatch, when a dispatcher comes over the air and tells them to respond somewhere, she reminds them now to turn their camera on. The hardest part is that if I'm walking down the street, if I leave here today, right, even though I would never have a body camera, but I'm wearing it today and say I did, if when I leave here and walk out the door, if I walk into something happening on the sidewalk, an assault or something like that, my first instinct is going to be to go attend to what's going on. I might not think about turning it on. So what we call self-initiated calls for service, they're the hardest for officers to remember. But over time, they'll get better at it because it becomes muscle memory with turning the camera on.
And so if I can follow up to that and also to your comment about the in-custody desk. On June 30th, 2016, the district government made law this act called the Neighborhood Engagement Achieves Results Act, which we fondly call the NEAR Act. It's basically a crime bill, but it has implications for our office and it has implications for MPD. And so the most important thing for our office that it gave us authority for is data reporting. So we now are the sole processor of complaints. And then before someone could file a complaint with MPD, they can file it with, it could go to internal affairs, it could go to our offices, there may be multiple complaints on the same issue. Now all complaints, even if MPD receives it, if the mayor's office receives it, it has to come to us and we process those complaints. That's so that we have a handle on the data regarding complaints from MPD and DC Housing Authority Police Department. So now that that's happening, that NEAR Act also gave us the authority to audit MPD's data. So now that we know what complaints are coming in and we're the sole processor, MPD has to forward those complaints to us if they receive it. The mayor's office has to forward the complaints if they see it. We also have in our independent authority, the independent authority to audit MPD's data. And so therefore, we will be able to match what we think we're seeing to the data that MPD actually holds. And so we're required by that act to do a report in December 30th of each year, which will start in 2017. It includes things like the demographic data of officers in custody deaths will be reported, data on that, use of force data. Our executive director, Mr. Tobin, is actually on the MPD use of force board, so he sees use of force that way as well. And so now that we have this bifurcated metric and process to see the complaints that were coming in and also the independent audit authority to match the data that MPD has to what we're seeing, we can do a comprehensive report of all these different areas that the community is concerned about in our independent authority. We don't report to the mayor, we don't report to the council, we are not part of MPD. We actually have the police complaints board, which is four residents of the districts that are volunteers, that is who manages our operations with the staff. And so we will have that independent authority to collaborate that data from an audit perspective and from a complaints perspective to have a transparent reporting mechanism on actually what's happening in the Metropolitan Police Department.
Okay. I want to also respond to that. I see you're very familiar with the framework of the NEAR Act, and everything that you stated is true, and it's a very good thing. But the problem that we have with that, we're trying to get the city to fund it. The NEAR Act has not been funded, so everything that you talked about cannot come into play until it is funded. About a couple months ago, I'm going to say this, the DC City Council unanimously voted an okay for the NEAR Act last year. Again, we have not been able to get them to fund the program as of today. What the mayor tried to do was she tried to fund $65,000 more to the police department. The DC City Council turned that down a couple weeks ago. But again, like I said, everything she said is good. I'm all for the NEAR Act, all for the NEAR Act. However, there is no funding. So we're out here protesting and rallying and trying to get signatures to have the city to fund the NEAR Act.
So our parts of it have actually been funded. We got additional funding for our FY17 budget to do the specific. So we have new staff that were specifically funded under the NEAR Act for this data reporting, which we did not have before. So when the requirements were coming out, our executive director went to the council and said, this is great, as you say, but how do we do it if we don't have the staff? And so at the end of FY16, we actually pitched for the funding to have the research staff and the analyst staff in our agency, and that person started in January. So we will be able to meet the reporting requirements of the NEAR Act for this year because we did get that funding in our FY17 budget, and it's carried forward in all the forward budgets. So at least for us, I know there's lots of parts that aren't funded, but for us, we pitched for it, made it very aware that we can't do this without the staff last year, and we got the funding for it. And so that's how we're able to report these statistics in April in our mid-year report. So we're starting.
So you are funded for the death in custody?
Yes, we have the staff that are specifically dedicated because of that new funding to be able to work with MPD with the data throughout the year to meet that report in December.
So has any data? Are you going to
Our
provide
first
the
report
data?
will be in April, so a month from now.
Okay.
We piloted it today. We
Yeah.
have it in draft. Once we end the second quarter, which is March 31st, we will be able to put it out at the beginning of April. It's actually on its way. So that the first half, which will include statistics on body-worn camera footage and types of allegation, which includes force, will be in that report on what we've seen so far this year. So at least for us, we are funded. There are many other parts that are not funded.
And those numbers, and why those numbers are so important to the organizations that I belong to, because particularly Every Case Matter is going to show that these death in custody are not an isolated incident. They're happening all over the country. And we want to charge the U.S. genocide because we all know that the people of African descent has been murdered unjustifiably by MPD unjustifiably. So those numbers are extremely important. So I'm glad to hear that that portion of the NEAR Act has been funded.
All right, on that note, I think we're at the time to open it up for audience questions. You've all made my job extremely easy. Sure, go ahead.
I can maybe speak louder enough for the room if you don't mind. I was wondering, now that there's more opportunity for proof positive of, say, a police officer falsifying their testimony for how an arrest was made, or possibly in court, or possibly in response to a civilian complaint, is there any movement either through civilian complaint boards, internally at the MPD, or from an appeals perspective, to go back through, particularly with some of the worst of the worst, the officers who repeatedly get complaints that maybe had been overcome in the past because they were he said, she said situations, and to give some sort of weight to this new circumstance in reopening, possibly relitigating some of those circumstances?
So it's a very complicated question. So it goes both ways. They've shown that officers have acted inappropriately, and they've shown that they also have, in many occasions when complaints have been made against officers, that they weren't accurate. So let's just know that we're starting from that foot. I will say is that it's always been our policy to hold accountable officers who don't belong in our department. We're very proud of MPD, and we do not like to have officers around that do not belong here. The good thing about body cameras is that, as has been said many times, is that it documents what happened. It documents what's said, what's not said, and actions that are taking place. So before, when you may have had an investigation and it was insufficient facts, which means there's not enough evidence on either side to say it happened or didn't happen, now we're in a position to show that it did or did not happen, so we can hold people accountable in more circumstances, and then conversely exonerate them when they didn't do anything wrong. The one thing I'll also say is we have a very, very good randomized control group study, the largest in the country, going on right now. And one of the things that study is focusing on, it's 4 main things. One of them is just that question you just asked, is the impact of the cameras and how they affect the dispositions of cases against officers, complaints.
Go ahead.
Sure, I would just like to address, so I think part of what I heard you saying was that now that we have this footage, we can show that officers are lying on the stand. So one very important thing to keep in mind is that officers actually get an opportunity to review their footage before they write reports or take the stand, which I think is really significant because in an instance when an officer might have otherwise said something different, they now know what the video says. So they have to testify at least somewhat consistently with the video. And then I think your larger question is hard, is also very complicated to answer, I think, from a legal perspective. If there were one officer who, we discovered was repeatedly, I don't know the body-worn camera footage would be the way we would discover it, but was repeatedly perjuring himself and was involved in a number of cases, like any other evidence, we would have to go back and look at how that piece of evidence played a role in the case and whether or not in each individual case we could get any relief for people.
I think you would find it very difficult to say because this person was caught on a body cam doing something that he then testified happened differently, you could then go back and look at other cases and say, oh, this guy must have done something wrong in the past. That's not going to happen. So you can't use the camera footage you've got now to go back and look really hard at. It's technically, I guess you could, but I don't think it's going to happen very often.
We have essentially an early warning tracking system. So where officers, when they get complaints, they're assessed points, and after they get a certain number of points, we start looking at them. So we don't review body camera for the sole purpose of looking for officers doing things wrong solely. If there's a complaint involved or we have reason to look at it, we do and we use it. So in that particular case, if we thought that an officer showed a pattern of a certain type of bad behavior or a certain type of good behavior, for the bad behavior we would use it, for the good behavior we might use it to reward them.
Yeah, go ahead.
In that same connection, officer, the footage is a huge set of facts about police behavior. Is there any use by the department of that archive to say, let's watch our officers at work? As you know, most police work is done outside of close supervision, even by sergeants, let alone lieutenants and people above. And common officers, fellow officers in the street, never will say what they saw their comrade doing. The blue wall of silence is a famous metaphor. So now that you have tens of thousands of hours of police conduct on video, can you tell us that MPD is actually looking at that to say, what can we learn about our officers' conduct, quite apart from complaints?
Well, we are always looking at video. Since we've had the program out, every day we're looking at it for some reason or another. And yes, we do use the video. We use it for training. We use it for looking for circumstances where maybe our officers aren't responding to something the way we think they should or we think's best, right? So we'll use that to devise training, to give to the officer so that maybe that particular area we adjust it to where we want it to go. Like I said before, I'm not going to go and pull a random officer's video and just watch him to find him doing something wrong. Because the program's a positive program in our department. I mean, it's not punitive. And we made sure when we rolled this out, we had the unions buy in, the officers buy in. We were very clear on our expectations. Our expectations are we're going to use it if we have a reason to look at it. If a complaint's made, we're going to use it in the complaint, for those type of situations. But we're not going to go fishing for officers doing things wrong. Now, we do use it to recreate circumstances all the time. We have tons of video from the past inauguration. And we've saved all that video because we feel that we're going to have to use that in the future, maybe in court. So, in the civil and the criminal side. So, yes, we do use the video. Yes, we are aware that there are hours of video that may show certain conduct, and if we have a reason to look at it, we will.
If I can follow up that, Commander Ennis talked about the study that's going on right now, so I'll give you some more information about it. There's a study going on that MPD is participating in, staff from the University of Arizona, and then the mayor's lab. It's called the lab at DC, is the mayor's office. She created this lab this year that looks at statistical data throughout the district. Our office has also now been included in that study. And so it's a multi-year plan. They started collecting data about the body-worn camera footage, I believe in June, and it's going to end in March. So that's the random data collection that Commander Ennis talked about. It will be we believe it will be the most comprehensive study that's statistically validated on body-worn camera footage. And it's originally body-worn camera footage, and the only kind of study that's verifiable is a study done in Rialto, California. But Rialto, California only has 60 officers. And then we now know, we didn't know at the time that the study was done, that the manufacturer who provided the body-worn camera footage also funded the study. So it's a little biased, it's a little statistically challenging, but it did show that there was a reduction in complaints, reduction in use of force when there was body-worn camera footage. The argument is that if the officer knows there's body-worn camera footage and he's going to be recorded, he will do things more good, right? And so in a general, systematic, reverse way, that's one argument for the body-worn camera footage. The study that's happening in the Metropolitan Police Department now with our office, the lab at DC, the mayor's office, the University of Arizona, and other researchers along with MPD researchers will be a study of an urban district police force that has statistical valid, verifiable data that was randomly done and selected to show these types of things without any bias in it. And so the plan that they said most recently is that it'll come out sometime this year. And so hopefully it will answer some of your questions. You know, what is the randomness of crime when there isn't body-worn camera footage? How does it reduce crime? Is the officer more likely to act appropriately when there isn't body-worn camera footage? So we believe that study that we're involved with, combined with our reporting requirements of the NEAR Act and the independent authority that we have to audit MPD's data, should give the district a comprehensive metric of what's actually happening with the body-worn camera footage in the Washington, D.C. area.
Let me take 10 seconds to explain something, why this is so significant. 10 seconds. First of all, so random means this, and I want you to understand this. It means we took names of officers away. We took like demographics, so like races, like years, and we divided them up into two even groups, and we gave cameras to half of them. So it's completely random off of metrics that make people the same. It's called equalizing. So this truly is the most comprehensive study in the United States that's going on right now.
Okay, I want to say this. We have these body cams, and even though we have these body cams, we're still not getting any indictments. Police officers are still unjustifiably murdering unarmed individuals with impunity. And I like what you said about all the efforts, about all of these different entities that's doing research. That's fine. But the core issue is systemic, as I stated earlier. We have a systemic racial judiciary system. And I don't know if you all are aware of this grand jury proceeding called the ex parte proceeding, which means it is one-sided. There is no defense. It's just the prosecutor, okay? As in my son's case, for instance. The prosecutor have complete discretion over the evidence that she submit to the grand jury. Secondly, the grand jury is secret. Nobody knows who the grand jury is. And because the prosecuting attorney have complete discretion over the evidence, if he or she wants an indictment, they can get an indictment. They will simply submit the evidence that they have to the grand jury to get an indictment. If the prosecuting attorney does not want an indictment, what he or she would do is withhold the evidence that they have. So the issue that we're having now is systemic. Even with these body cams, we blatantly see police officers unjustifiably murdering, particularly black and brown people at disproportionate rates. It's because the issue is systemic. And until we do an of our judiciary system, you're going to continue to see police officers murdering unjustifiably with impunity.
Any more questions from the audience? Is there anybody else that hasn't asked a question?
I wanted to know in terms of cost. In terms of cost, do you have long-term and short-term grants to fund this program? Is it all coming from the district government, or do you get grants from DOJ?
We're a mixture of both. It's primarily funded under local dollars. We did receive $1 million grant from DOJ that we're currently spending now.
And if I could just ask a quick follow-up, is anything changed with the relationship with the federal government, with the new administration, in terms of prospects for future funding of
No,
body
and
cam
I
programs?
don't think we would see that this early on anyway. But no, we're in DC's unique. We have a great relationship with the federal government here, and all of us do. And at the end of the day, when you compare us to the rest of the country in policing, it's a little different here in DC. So we have a great, just can't reiterate enough, we have a great relationship.
Yes.
I can't hear you.
What are the videos that are being released, and how soon are they released? You have them on the site that you mentioned earlier on some of them, like what videos are?
So there's only a couple. So there's 3 ways. I'm glad it's a good question because it allowed me to. There's 3 ways that you can see video. A mayoral release is of great public interest. That's going to be your more significant cases, police shootings, other really significant incidents that occur that the interest of the public would dictate the mayor releasing it outside of the FOIA process. The other way video gets released is through discovery in criminal cases, and that's generally only to the suspect or the person who was arrested. Another way is through FOIA. Anybody has the right to FOIA video. Then we apply the FOIA rules to determine if we're going to release it, and if we are, what's redacted. And the final way, and that's unique to DC, is that if you're a subject of the video, so if you're in it, you have the ability to ask to view your video. You're not going to get a copy of it, but you can view it. And what we do is we go to lengths to make sure that we protect everybody else's privacy, show you your interactions when you're the only one in the video, and then you can come to the station and watch it.
And those videos are redacted also?
It depends. If it's just me and you, and if it's just the 2 of us, it wouldn't be. If there's innocent or uninvolved people that are in it, then what we would do in the viewing, if we could, is we would cut out the segments that other people are in and just show you the segments that you're in.
I wanted to respond to your question. As I mentioned earlier, that one of the reasons how they get released is under the total discretion of the mayor. She decides if the video is of great interest to the public. As I said earlier, all the videos that involve with police shootings and killings is in great interest of the public. But when it shows MPD in a bad light, that's why you see us out there protesting and rallying for the release of the videos. Oftentimes, they don't always get released unless through discovery and a FOIA request. However, my son didn't have a problem of releasing his, because his was showing MPD in a good light. They was trying to resuscitate my son. It was the 2 special police officers that murdered my son.
And I would just add quickly to that the videos that have been released so far by the mayor's office might be only from one officer's perspective who was involved, or only contain segments of the interaction. And I don't want to say that I guess MPD can speak, or the mayor's office can speak to why that is, but I just think that's important, as for you all as journalists to know when it's like footage released of shooting, that might not mean that all of the footage that exists for the shooting has been released.
There are 2 other things that I think you all should keep in mind. There's a great secret here that's really a great secret if you decide to try and use it, which is there isn't only video. There's a tremendous amount of metadata that goes with the video about where it was shot, under what circumstances, what kind of case it was, and things like that. That is basically a database of information that's kept and is maintained despite the 90 days the video may be erased in. The retention period is at least 5 years, I believe, under,
For which part?
for the data, for the metadata.
I can't tell you. The metadata, it's whatever the identifiers were on the video. That, I'm not sure. I'll have to find out. I don't know how long that is kept up.
But the point is, if there's this massive amount of data about calls that Metropolitan Police gets and their responses to it, which can be visualized and may produce stories. But the other thing is that if a piece of video is used in court as an exhibit in a trial or in a hearing, you have a right to see it. And if it's a case that was prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney's Office, generally the U.S. Attorney will give you a copy of it. If it was tried by the Attorney General, in other words, a traffic case or petty offense, Carl Racine has taken the position till now that the only way you can get that video is through MPD. He will not disclose it. The Open Government Coalition wrote him a letter about 2 weeks ago saying, under the First Amendment and common law, you have a right, the public has a right to see exhibits, even if they're video from a body cam. And we're trying to get him to change his policy. So in a criminal case where there's an exhibit, or even in a civil case, you should ask either the court clerk, or if the video has been returned to the parties, which is usually the practice, ask the attorneys, either the prosecutor or defense counsel, because that stuff should be available to you.
Can I say, if you're the subject of the video, it's rather easy to see it. You can ask to view it. There's lots of ways for you to get your own video. One thing you need to understand is that a lot of police departments around the country struggle with body cameras is because you have to balance the protection of the public who are calling the police with the public right to know. So you have people that are in the worst times of their lives in many cases calling the police, and we're responding into their homes. And you know, do you want somebody to have that up on the news? Or, you know, it's kind of one of those things that's one of the biggest struggles, is making sure that your personal protections are, you know, looked after. And places that are not fortunate, like DC, to have the laws that we have to protect people's privacy, they struggle with it, and that's why some departments haven't went with body cameras yet.
Okay. Which brings up the sort of, this is the issue I think we were going to get to eventually.
Let's get one more question on the floor.
I would actually love to hear the issue, but I also was wondering, we're talking about possible potential effect on police behavior, but have the police seen any broad impacts on the public's behavior now, knowing that more and more police are wearing body cameras?
So I can, my researcher would kill me if I answered this how I want to answer it. I'll just say this, is that after the study in the early summer, we'll have a better answer to that, but there is an effect of cameras changing everybody's behavior. I think anecdotally we can say is that I've watched plenty of videos to where it starts one way, and then when you say, hey, you're being recorded, it changes. So it's just a natural effect.
I'm sorry, I just have a follow-up question to what
Sure.
you're saying. So based on what Ms. Smith is saying about there being a system of discrimination, and what you're saying that it changes, the body cameras changing people's behavior, and then there's not indictments. I'm wondering, actually, this is probably more for Ms. Howard. Is there actually more of an investigation going on regarding the systemic discrimination against certain colors of people, based on what Ms. Smith is saying? Is that part of your mission? Are you doing that? And have you seen anything?
So we keep data on all the types of allegations that we get, the demographics of the wards that they come from, you know, what allegations come from which wards, what types of people are following complaints, what types of officers are involved in the complaints. And so we report that every year. Those general demographics and the general statistics about the types of complaints, who they come from and who they involve. We've been reporting that in our annual reports. This year we will attach it to body-worn camera footage as well. So I don't know yet, because we actually are going retroactively back to all of 16 through our complaints, even though the body-worn camera footage. So from June forward, we're going back through and validating all of our data on what we've seen in our complaints that also involve or don't involve body-worn camera footage. So I don't know what it's going to tell us yet, but we already had that regular data point with the demographics of who, what, and where. match to types of allegations. So for example, do more allegations of discrimination come from Ward 2? Things like that. We already have that data. This year, we're going back currently right now to attach body-worn camera footage to that data. So potentially, we could say body-worn camera footage is used less in Ward 1. Potentially. I don't know. But we already have that regular data, and now we're going to add in the body-worn camera footage data that we're seeing in our complaints, and we'll see what trends it shows us.
But you cannot make that complete decision with just the body cams and the complaints. There has to be a report from every law enforcement agency of the death in custody. That's why the Death in Custody Reporting Act is falling into the NEAR Act. When we can see that there is actually a disproportionate rate of black people, people of color, black and brown, of being murdered by MPD with impunity, we need those numbers. We just can't go by your complaints that you receive and the body cams. We need the actual reports.
So let me answer that. First of all, I think MPD is a metaphor for policing in the United States. There's no death in D.C. that's at police hands that's not investigated and open to the public. Not one. Not one.
That's not true.
So if a police officer is involved in every single police officer involved death in D.C. is reviewed by the United States Attorney's Office independently also. So, we actually have an annual report that we publish every year that talks about those type of things, in custody deaths, firearm discharges, when we use amount of force, everything. So does the OPC. So don't get the impression that MPD is killing people and you don't know about it. That is not the case in Washington, D.C.
It's not an impression.
I don't think so. From a citizen perspective, I don't think that's the perspective. I think the perspective is we're thinking that body cameras are supposed to hold everyone accountable. And I'm talking specifically towards your comment about, or actually I think it was someone else, about behaviors changing from the public and the police force. But it seems like, based on what Ms. Smith is saying, is that the body cameras are not necessarily holding the officers accountable for their behavior. It's more used as a tool to help police officers in general. I don't
No, that's not true. So that maybe I just wasn't clear in how I explained this. They got many uses. So we use them in court. We use them for administrative investigations. They're a major linchpin in our internal affairs investigations now. So they do shed a light on what's occurring. And if there's a complaint or we're looking into a situation because we have an allegation that an officer did something wrong, we certainly use that video for the purpose of establishing what occurred. And that video will be in the final report and referred back to. It's the same thing with the Office of Police Complaints. If the Office of Police Complaints receive they'll use it in their investigations. And we actually have a policy that we instituted on our department now that says that if there's body camera video in relation to any sort of report, whether it's a complaint or use of force, whatever it is, that every level, every supervisor at every level needs to certify that they've watched the video and that the written report matches what's in the video. So we very much use that to hold our officers accountable.
Police-involved murders are not independently investigated. MPD is an agency under the U.S. Attorney General Office, so therefore they're not considered as independent. What we are all fighting for is to have and request for an independent prosecutor, someone who is outside of the federal government. You cannot say that it's independently being investigated by U.S. Attorney Office when basically you're an agency under the U.S. Attorney General Office.
So our office, when we have the body-worn camera footage in a complaint, we review it, and generally, our executive director testified in front of the council last week, or a few weeks ago, that sometimes it exonerates the officers, sometimes it substantiates the complainant's allegations that misconduct did happen. Generally, so far, we've seen it go both ways. Sometimes it supports the complainant's allegations, sometimes it does not, sometimes it supports the officer's account of what happened, sometimes it does not. The study, I believe, that's happening in the district, which includes our complaint data, so it will match the complaints we received about misconduct, should be able to show how it's holding people accountable when and when not, when it is and is not holding people accountable, and what that accountability accounts for.
So the two recent murders, since he said there wasn't not one, let's see, there was Javon Hall on Christmas, and let me see, there was also Sterling Terrence, I believe. And I want to ask you that out of all your complaints, are any of those complaints involving police-involved shootings?
Our complaints?
Yes.
Yes, we're authorized to investigate for it.
What, can you tell me what percentage of those complaints?
It's in our
Okay.
report, it's on our
Okay.
website, it's out, it's been published.
Okay, I would love to get that information.
It's on our website, policecomplaints.dc.gov. Our FY16 report was published in January, which has the
Right.
percentages of what types of complaints we got last year. And in April, we'll put out our mid-year report that will have the same. We report every year on the types of complaints we get and the percentages per allegation.
All right, well, I think this is still a very rapidly developing area, obviously, and rather new. But I want to note that we are 8 minutes over time. I want to thank all of our panelists, thank our very involved audience, and I hope that people with remaining questions can come down.
Can I plug the study? I implore you. The parameters of the study are published on what they call, and I don't know what it is, I'm going to repeat it. It's called the Open Science Framework. So if you go to the Open Science Framework and look up the Metropolitan Police Department body-worn camera study, you'll see exactly what they're looking at and how they're doing it. So,
And that's due out next month, is that right?
it's going to be in the early summer.
Okay, early summer. All right, well, maybe we can reconvene this panel a year from now and see what's changed. But join me in thanking all of our panelists.